So grateful I said yes when DJ asked via email. He started out as a fan. He saw me in a play. He was like, yeah, Juliano, I saw you in this play. You were great, but will you also do the same for me? And I was like, I don't know. You're asking me to camp in the woods and shoot film. But here we are, and I'm so glad I said yes. Before we get started, let's go ahead and give another round of applause for the composers and the filmmakers tonight, y'all. They've been so fun. Before they come up, I'll read their bios, and as I read each of your bios, composers and filmmakers, and then you will come up and join me on stage. I'm going to ask them some questions about the process, about how it felt, and then I will open the floor for questions, and then that'll be the end of our night. That sound good? Great. First up, we'll have Portland-based drummer, composer, and educator, Micah Hummel. Micah Hummel is a first call player in the creative music scene in the Pacific Northwest. He is known for his specialization in cross-genre sounds and contemporary jazz. He has performed in venues from Toronto and Beijing, Amsterdam, Berlin, and Vienna. He regularly performs with local projects, including Samba Dams, Integer, and the Michael Hummel / Alex Meltzer duo. Micah is endorsed by Cannabis Drums and Sunhouse Technologies. Give it up for Micah Hummel, everyone. And please forgive me if I mispronounce any names. Thank you. I'm charmed. Up next, we have Adolfo Cantu Villarreal. Adolfo is a Mexican filmmaker and cinematographer based in Portland, born and raised in the mountains of Monterrey, Mexico. Adolfo believes in the richness of diversity. He strives to tell the stories of the underrepresented and to showcase the artistry and talents of people of different backgrounds, both in front and behind the camera. His films have been shown in festivals around the world and featured in Vice, PBS, Icon Germany, and the New York Times. Give it up for Adolfo, everybody. Up next, Pacific Northwest performer and composer Noah Simpson's approach to the trumpet is modern, energetic, dynamic, and attentive. Simpson has worked with George Benson, Louis Nash, Bernard Purdy, Alex Acuna, Ralph Peterson III, Jaleel Shaw, Sean Jones, and Dennis Rowland. He has toured the U.S. with Ron Artis II, Climbing Poetry, The Polyphonic Spree, and Dirty Revival. His recent work includes arranging and producing the PDX Jazz Educational Presentation, The American Refrain, Jazz and Modern Music. Come on up, Noah Simpson. Yeah. Up next, we have Shimbos and Taco. Shilpa is a screenwriter, director, and producer with an affinity for stories about different cultures in coexistence. Thanks to her background as an Indian American woman raised in the cowboy country of Colorado, her short film, Working Lunch, premiered at the Toronto South Asian Film Festival. Her other short films, The Company of Thieves and Biography of an American Hostess, have won awards including, as soon as I can turn the page, Best Director at the Los Angeles First Glance Film Festival. Her feature script, Sita's Demon, was showcased at the C3 conference at the Los Angeles Asian Pacific American Film Festival. Come on up, Shilpa. And last, but certainly not least, we have Lord, don't be mad at me if I mispronounce your name, Juliano Scott is a self-taught filmmaker, editor, and producer based in Portland, Oregon. He manages Desert Island Studios a film and photo studio that supports underserved members of the Portland arts community. His film credits include production work on Love, Cheryl, film editor of the short film El Hortelán, winner of the Most Original Concept at the 2020 Portland Short Fest, film editor of the documentary Staying Connected, and uncredited assistant editor on The Speed Cubers, which made the Oscar shortlist in 2021. Scott won Best Editor for the short film Vent at the Asian American Film Lab 72-hour shootout. Come on up, DJ. Welcome, composers and filmmakers. Thank y'all for being here tonight. Thank you, the audience, for being here tonight. Before we hop right into questions, is there anything that you all want to say to help bring yourselves present into the space right now? No?
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Happy to see all your faces.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, let's get into it. When I was talking to Neil about the project, I was like, okay, what does call and response mean to you? Because I know what it means to me. Growing up in Miami, growing up in a Black church for some time, call and response means to me like the preacher would say something and we would all affirm it, knowing that we all listened to it. Amen? Amen. Exactly, call and response. And so my first question for you all is, what was your initial response when the Monteville Jazz Festival asked you to participate in the Call and Response project? And have you done similar collaborations before? And anybody else can answer first?
I was really excited. I don't really get to do mixed media like this, and to have something that gets to live on. I don't do a lot of things that go on in perpetuity like this. I kind of just make things in the moment and then they're kind of gone forever. But to have something and get to work with someone as awesome as Shilpa and to have this live on, yeah, just super awesome.
I'll jump in. First, shout out to Jeff Oliver. He couldn't be here. He asked me to be part of the panel. He asked me to join the project. We had collaborated before. And something I think we've really connected is that in everything I shoot, and it can be narrative or documentaries, I try to stay away from reflecting reality. Because to me, film has always, gone beyond that. Growing up as a Mexican immigrant in the US, sometimes when you arrive to the country, you don't have a whole lot, but one thing that me and my brother could always go to is a movie. And a movie really takes you to a different place. So in my work, even by choosing a lens or choosing a filter or the way we're going to shoot a scene, I always try to just add a tiny bit of magic. So I think Jeff and I connected and that we wanted to, be stuck to rapport to be, this alternate reality, even when we were like in nature. So that was a really cool connection.
That's interesting. That I'll chime in there because that makes me think a little bit about my own family, having come from India, and we were raised with Bollywood and a lot of film and a lot of music. That's a huge culture there. So for me, I'm a filmmaker, and I was really have a lot of education in filmmaking. But the truth is, we're so inspired by music and as a culture, and I grew up with so much music as a culture in our house. And as I grew older, jazz was something that became so huge to me. It's something I became incredibly inspired by. So when Monteville Jazz approached me for this, I had already been thinking for a long time, how can I combine film and music, and how can I combine film and jazz? And I didn't know how that was really, what that really looked like and what it sounded like, and what kind of the product of that would be. But when they came to me with that proposition, I was like, yes, whatever it is that's going to come out of it, it's going to be awesome. And then, of course, I figured out that Noah Simpson was involved. I've been a fan of his for years already, so it was kind of an automatic at that point for me. But it was a very inspiring prospect for me.
Yeah, same. I felt like it was a resounding yes when I was asked to do this project, and it came in a really kind of dark time. I mean, with COVID and with music, I mean, I was genuinely contemplating whether or not it was going to be realistic for me to pursue music after, or when this is all said and done, who knows when that would be. But yeah, it came at a really important time for me to have a project and to be sought out. I'm not being a drummer, I'm typically in a supportive role, and I love that about what I do. But yeah, to be asked specifically for like my voice, although I was helped very much so by the co-writer, like he's Alex Meltzer. It was a really important time to be asked to do something like that.
I think for me, I was like, nah, I'm good. I feel like I've never been in a director's role, so I had a lot of fear going into it, to be completely transparent. Just not feeling like I could potentially live up to the project and what was asked. And then after talking to Devin, he was kind of orchestrating the filmmaker side of things. I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. I'll try it out. So.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all for saying yes. Because if not, we wouldn't be here tonight. I think it's kind of brilliant combining composers and filmmaking, because I think composing and score is what makes a film for me. Music was a heavy influence for me as well, so yeah, it's cool. For the composers, for Micah and Noah, what was your process composing for this?
My process was pretty unique actually. I play mostly drums, and there's a new technology called sensory percussion, which is by a company called Sunhouse. And basically, the sensors clip onto my acoustic drums, and they send digital information to the computer, basically, that you can assign sounds to later. So I had sensors attached to my drums, and there was kind of this piano loop I was playing along to, but I was pretty much just playing drums to it. And then it recorded all of this information in the computer. And then Alex Meltzer and I went back and kind of assigned sounds to the information that I had already played, which is why we called it retroscript, because it kind of came almost after the fact, based off of what had already happened. So it's kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like coloring, like filling in a coloring book to an animal you've never seen before. There's just all this information that you can put whatever colors and textures and sounds. And then we made the piece that way, and then we were like, well, shit, how are we gonna play this live? So we had to figure out, we kind of had to transcribe ourselves almost, and go back and learn what we had programmed, and then figured out how we were going to do it live. And basically how we did it was, I was playing drums live the whole time, and a little bit of guitar. I played guitar and then head off and played drums. And Alex was manning the computer, and pretty much like what I was playing, my acoustic drums would come out no matter what. And then depending on what keys Alex was holding down, his keyboard would be the sounds that were coming out of my drum set. So if he was holding, C, E, G, it could be strings, and in one case it was even the guitar at the beginning of the track. We sampled that beforehand, and then he was kind of throwing it, splashing it in and out as I was playing. So depending on what he was holding down, dictated the sounds that were coming out of my drums, which was a really exciting process.
I just played the trumpet, I don't know. But Mike and I used to live together, and I was living with him when we were starting to do this, and I used to just see his setup of like his computer and his drums and just trying to do this, and I was just like, look, go to my room, it's just a little trumpet, little music stand. I think my process was, we were talking for a while about what we wanted to try to encompass, and something that we were just trying to, the points and the ideas that we were trying to hit. And something that we kind of landed on very early was like desert imagery, just something along the lines of.
I think that was coincidental, actually. I think you brought it up, and I'd already kind of had like an idea there, and it was some kind of weird simpatico that we noticed.
Yeah, it was just like, oh, I think we're both thinking about this. Cool, let's just go with that. So, It was a little weird. Yeah, I just tried to think about the piece I wrote was called Cahava Springs, and Cahava Springs is a springs behind the mountain I grew up in Arizona. And I've just really tried to picture and channel in that, and like composing wise, like I knew kind of what I wanted. I wanted trumpet, bass, guitar, and drums, but as you heard in it, there's a lot of layering that goes within it, and that was actually very deliberate. Like I kind of wrote out exactly what I wanted, kind of specifically to like going to the guitar player Jack's pedals, and I'm like, use that one and that one, I'll use that one, something like that. And I remember the drummer Ken Master Giovanni, he had to drive all the way up from Eugene, and I said, just bring everything, like just bring everything you have. He shows up with his car, and he has like these 2 big bags, and we just lay them out, and we just start picking through stuff, and I'm like, yeah, let's use that, let's use that. So we just kind of built this, so we played everything kind of like it was a jazz standard, and then went in and then did all the layering kind of a post. And there's no trumpet on that, I decided to do all flugelhorn, which is very different for me.
Were there any challenges in your creative process because it was a pandemic, because we were all in our homes? Aditya was mentioning how difficult it was to, Aditya isn't with us, by the way, y'all, but Aditya is the composer on DJ's piece, The Last Signs of June. But she spoke of how difficult it was to be able to create a piece. How do I do it in these times, especially with people trying to be safe? So did you all feel any of those challenges in working with your collaborators?
I got lucky. Alex lives with me, so we were kind of good there. And I still haven't. We just met tonight, and he worked on our film. And I still have not met Jeff yet, who was the director of Beast of Torpor. So yeah, I mean, I felt like obviously with Alex and I living together, that solved a lot of issues in terms of collaborating musically.
I live in a tiny studio apartment by myself, so I don't get to live with my family, unfortunately. But yeah, usually when you write something like that and you bring in a new tune, you get to get like a run through. Just like, oh, let's try it, let's see if it works, let's see what we got to change, something like that. We didn't really have they were very gracious. Monteville Jazz gave us like a certain hour of time, but I already kind of knew that we wouldn't have time to rehearse. So I went in with like 3 different versions of that song of just like, we'll go like this, and if that doesn't work, we do this, and if that doesn't work, we'll do this. And I had to come in like super, super prepared, because if something didn't work, I just had to be ready to replace it like on the fly.
Wow. Since we're talking about process, we'll still stay in this world of filmmakers. What was your process? How do you approach connecting with the composer's music? And how much time did you spend with it before sketching out an idea for the film?
So yeah, Noah and I had kind of started talking right off the bat, I think. And he was talking about having these different ideas for a bolero or other kinds of, things he'd been working on, and they were all inspiring to me. As far as I was concerned, I'm not a musician myself, so I'm a little less knowledgeable, so I knew that whatever Noah was going to come with, I was just excited about it, whatever it was going to be. But I did get, so coincidentally, I received Noah's music, the first rough version of it, when I was at a residency in the desert, by the way. There's a chime work for the evening for you and me.
Do you remember when you called me to put those notes?
Was I in the desert?
No, I was in Hawaii.
Oh,
you were in the desert. I was in Hawaii.
That's right. I was at home by that point. But I had just come back, and I had 2 ideas for. I had a couple of different ideas already by then for what could go with his music, and one was far more narrative, and it had a lot more like pixelation, animation type stuff to it, and the other one was this desert idea, and that was one of the things, was he brought up the desert, and I was like, oh, well, man, I almost just have to pick a desert idea now, but it was also something I was very excited about, is picking the idea that was really celebratory, and that just kind of celebrated all of these things all these cultures that I'd grown up with in the desert, and celebrating that with jazz, which is one of the most American exports on this planet. and celebrating that in the desert, which the American desert is such an iconic idea about this country, and celebrating all of those cultural ideas in those distinctly American entities, I think that was a connection I was really excited to make. So that was the one I eventually landed on.
What was the question? I'm like so engaged with what they're saying.
Took us down the rabbit hole there.
It's all good.
No, you're good.
The question was, what was your process? How did you approach connecting with the composer's music? How much time did you spend with it before sketching out an idea for the film?
Yeah, so my process, I co-wrote it with one of my best friends, Joseph Matos. So I would just go over to his house every day and we just play the track back. The unique thing with our situation was Dee, she already had the song recorded, so I was just given that track to utilize. But after picking her brain, she was like, I essentially just got my community together and we just jammed out, and I was like, oh, so you did this in one take? Oh, wow, okay, like highly talented. So with that, we just kind of ran with that, and I really wanted to create that sense of community in the process. Like, I don't think we really dialed down a theme right away. It took a while, but at the end of the day, it was more so about like the community on set, and so I was really trying to get everyone to go camping, as you know, Dre. So that was like my big push, is like, I don't really care what we do as long as we get to go camping. So yeah, after that, it dwindled a lot of ideas out, and we landed on Bigfoot. So.
I can speak on the cinematography side for the project. One thing that I think Jeff, and when he sent it to me, really connected with the music, was that it felt that there's a story. And I think Jeff was really excited to connect that story to something he created. And when he brought it to me, is making that connection, through the cinematography. And shout out to my tiny camera department, Kim and Angela, they were amazing. But it was, how can we tell this story in an interesting way that would contrast when we were shooting outdoors, nature, and shooting in studio, and how to connect with the intensity of the track that was created. So I think like any film projects, it's challenges, and I think that's what makes it interesting. And I think it's embracing that challenge what makes it fun, at least for me. It's limited resources, but how do we create something that's interesting for the audience and interesting for the creators? So, yeah.
Speaking of limited resources, how was it to have to construct a project with the budget that you all were given for this as well?
I think for me it was pretty tough, just because I kind of went all out with my crew and cast, and very thankful for them, because I know that I couldn't pay them adequately, so it was more out of passion and just trusting my vision in them wanting to do it. So I felt very fortunate to have just like such a supporting cast there, knowing the constraints of the budget. So yeah.
I mean, my answer is the same, I suppose. It was really, really constraining for sure. But again, yeah, we had, and we took everybody out to an exotic location, I suppose, as far as Oregon goes. So we really definitely spread that budget quite thin and tried to get as much of it as we could into the frame. And yet still, try to compensate folks and make sure we had water while we were out in the desert. And COVID protocols and whatnot, but luckily being out in the desert helped with all of that as well. So.
Similar circumstances, but I always go back to ask any immigrant kid, about their dreams growing up, and for me it was like, for years I didn't have a camera. I started with photography because I couldn't afford a video camera, and I was still, doing films through that. And the first DSLR that could shoot video in one lens, and I started shooting that. So compared to that, this was easy.
A common theme throughout all three pieces showcased people of color in nature. And I thought that was really, really beautiful and really grounding for me. And so I just wanted to know, what did it mean to showcase these different cultures in the woods or in the desert for you, and why was it important to show that?
Yeah, again, for me, I think I can easily go back to, expand on infinitely to, the idea that I was really, really eager to show this. I was really eager to sort of present a different version of what American things are, what American beauty is. American jazz, American desert. We've heard all these things, but we rarely relate them to the Native American and, an Indian American and an African American, and, putting all those things together. These are all things that I've grown up with, and I grew up in Colorado, which, is middle America, but, I grew up in an Indian household where we had, festive holidays full households full with colorful food and, all kinds of jam-packed full of all kinds of people there to celebrate, as well as, there was a giant Latino population there, so we were always celebrating Cinco de Mayo or, name your holiday. And then, we had all kinds of people, related to the university that was in town. So we had a house full of people of color all the time. So I think I maybe, saw a slightly different America growing up. And those were all the things I felt like I really wanted to celebrate. And this is the kind of America that I saw. There is the American jazz, which is a huge iconic thing about American culture. And the desert, which is represented in all of our films and all our media, ad laudanum. And putting those all together and representing that kind of American media that I was used to was really what got me. So.
Yeah, kind of on a similar note, like for me, growing up, I did a lot of camping with my dad, and I just recall, I grew up in Washington State, and I remember just going out and never really seeing people that looked like us when we were camping. And as Joseph and I were collaborating on this idea, we really wanted to bring Black and brown voices into spaces that you don't necessarily see in narratives. And so, one, we wanted it to be in the woods and grounded in there, but then two, it's like, okay, well, what else? Where do you not see Black and brown voices? And I was like, I don't think I've ever seen that in Bigfoot. So we're gonna explore this a little more and go down this route. So that's kind of where we started off, launching that idea. But again, it's just creating a space that is inclusive for everyone. And I think, I don't want to speak for anyone, but it seemed like everyone was in that same mindset as far as what nature meant to them in some capacity. So it's kind of cool to watch everyone else's films and be like, oh, they're also in nature, this is dope, but then also seeing the differences in the concept, which was really cool. So, yeah.
I grew up in Monterrey, in Mexico, which is a city just full of mountains. I tell people, you don't get lost, you just go, I live down. But playing soccer is tough because it just rolls miles down. And then I moved to Texas because circumstances of life, which was the flattest place I've ever seen in my life. You could drive 15 hours and still be there. So when I decided to move, I really liked that Portland was a city you could get away from. And I mean that in a good way. You could go to the forest, you could go to a lake, you can go to the mountains, to the coast. And those places are so big in magnitude and in beauty that whatever problems you're bringing with you, those places let you know your problems are very tiny. And I think there's something very freeing about that. And also something I wanted to bring up is, and shout out to our main actor, Vaughn, she was amazing. It's crafting and being careful about the people that's in front of your camera and show that beauty that you can bring from them. An example I give is, it's very awkward if someone just stands in front of you and just stares at you to kind of get to know you. But if you have a camera in between, you're allowed to do that, which is such a privilege. So to me, it's so important that when we show that diversity in front of the camera, you put care to how they look, how they, with different light, again, with different decisions you're making to bring that beauty that they have in them. So I think that was a really something very important for me. And something you mentioned is the diversity. My camera department is from Mexico and Guatemala. So it's important that we see that diversity in front and behind the camera, because that diversity does exist in Portland. I don't think there's excuses to saying like, oh, we couldn't find diverse people for whatever industry they're in, you know? There's so much talent in so many different communities out here. So I'm so happy that, you know, things like this are happening, because there's so many stories like this that we could be telling.
Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all for your truth and your vulnerability and your passion, because representation does matter. And yes, and thank you. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience, maybe 3 if we make it deep and brief. Does anyone have a question that is burning in their mind that they just gotta say? I can't see good, so if you got one, just stand up.
I've got one.
Oh, go for it.
So here, I'm curious, it sounds like in this instance, the music and the films were kind of developed independently. Do I have that right? And so my question is as composers, did you have to how did you adapt to the film medium? And as filmmakers, is that the way you normally work? And if not, how did you adapt? It just sounds like it was a unique situation where, you know, you had creative elements developing on parallel paths, and then I'm curious how you were able to wed them together.
I was gonna say, for me, it wasn't independent at all.
We talked on the phone.
Yeah,
all the time.
But did you actually, did you write the music prior to shooting?
So so the there's like a logistical thing, unfortunately, that had to be there because of COVID and because of budget restrictions. There's like, you had to record the music and then get it to them and then we get it, and that was kind of the time frame. But like, we were very much in contact constantly about just like, I'm thinking about this, what do you think about this? Or like, what if I started playing with this? And even if it was things that we didn't really understand, it's just like, sure. And then I'm automatically defaulting to just like, I would trust Shilpa with anything that it looks like, if she trusted me with anything that it sounded like. But yeah, like I tried to get her as clear of a picture as I could of what it was gonna sound like before I went to the studio.
So the first time you guys got
We met together after the film was done. We met at the screening.
So what was the first?
Screening, and then even then, we didn't even meet at the
No, we didn't meet at the
screening.
screening.
We met at like a Friday night anniversary show for the 1905 or whatever. Randomly, I'm like, oh my God, you're here! Oh, you're playing! Awesome!
So what was the first time you saw the film, or what was the first time you heard the music?
So I heard the music. I think it was in February, because I think I received it right when I got to that residency. And then I just mulled on it for a shamefully long time, quite frankly. I should have gotten my butt out that chair and started developing it way earlier. But when the ideas came, it really, really started flowing. So that was good. It was mainly because I was swamped with work more than anything. But, so when I got to it, man, they just really started flowing. But I took a while to sort of come up with those concepts, but I had his music to just like listen and listen. I must have listened to it 1,000 times before the ideas really came to me personally. That was my process.
Is that your goal?
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, sorry.
Not for me, and that's only simply because I haven't done like music films like this before.
Got it.
Just to tap on to that question, so you guys heard the music, and in the beginning, you can tell it's kind of choreographed with the dancers to match the beginning with the bass and everything like that. But everything else, or maybe that's how they interpreted it.
I just like, as a composer, I wanted to give Shilpa everything that she could. You know what I mean? Like I wanted to have the song to have movement, to have shape and kind of like that. So that was and we had talked about that, just like, yeah, like, I'm thinking about having this movement where we start this way and we go this way and we go into this big loud section and then that section crashes down like that. Like, that's how I think about shaping it. But
Yeah, he just put drama in there for me, so I didn't have to like edit that into my film, he just made it.
Did your actors have any trouble dancing to that music at all?
Ooh, this is a longer answer, I'm so sorry, Neil. So actually, each individual dancer had different approaches to the music entirely. A couple of the performers came in with their own choreographed things, and a couple of the performers actually choreographed dance to the music, and we filmed all of it, like multiple times, different ways in front of that beautiful rock. And then when it came into the editing, we just like took his music and let it sort of guide us as to the pacing, and the location sort of guided us a little bit on how things were to come together, and the dancers guided us on a lot of that. It was a lot of things we pulled together into editing in the end, and just pieced them together into a beautiful piece.
Awesome. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all so much for sticking around and listening to our fabulous composers and filmmakers. Thank y'all for speaking your truth and being up here. I know it's hard, but thanks everyone, and thank you to Monteville Jazz. Have a great day.